Fast X Part 2 is currently scheduled for release in March 2026, and with it being the potential finale for the whole franchise, we have our concerns. Today on ScreenRant, we delve into the mistakes that could ruin the Fast and Furious franchise. First up, we have to call back to the ending of Fast X itself, which set up a pretty major and wild return. In the previous film, Han had made his return after seemingly being killed in a car accident in Tokyo Drift, later revised to vehicular homicide courtesy of the villainous Deckard Shaw at the end of Furious 6. It turned out in F9 that Han's death was actually a fake out by Mr. Nobody, although how exactly he managed this was not shown or explained. This was a pretty major retcon for fans of the series, who had been quick to catch on during the fourth installment that Tokyo Drift didn't take place at its stated point in the timeline. Suddenly, there was a tension that grew as the series progressed, and Han kept reappearing, begging the question of when Tokyo Drift and Han's death would take place. When it finally happened, it essentially created the basis of Furious 7. It was an emotional moment in the franchise that felt like a fixed point in time. This meant that his reappearance in F9 came off as a jumping of the shark for many fans. All that is to say, the end of Fast X took another emotional moment, the death of Giselle in Furious 6. And seemingly retconned it as well. As you might recall, Gal Gadot shows up in a submarine to rescue Letty and Cypher in Antarctica. Presumably, she's playing the same character, and not a twin sister or clone or whatever other wild ideas the writers may have had. If that's the case, bringing Giselle back from the dead represents a second shark-jumping moment involving the return of a dead character. There is a chance that the creative team behind Fast X had some idea of what they were getting at with Giselle's return. Perhaps there is a reason for it that isn't as silly and insulting as Han's agency-sponsored escape. However, we can't come up with anything that makes logical sense, even in the reality-melting world of Fast and Furious. The most likely solution is that she simply wound up in a hospital and had to recover from her injuries like Owen Shaw did, as revealed at the beginning of Furious 7. This, however, opens up more questions, like, did no one think to go back and make sure her body was recovered? Are we to believe that the guys constantly spouting family would just forget about their potentially wounded comrade? Or perhaps we'll find out that she was simply in a coma and retcon everyone's perspective of the incident. Either way, we think that it's a returning character who should have stayed dead. One character who isn't dead in the Fast and Furious universe is Brian, whose actor Paul Walker tragically passed away in 2013. His unfinished role in Furious 7 was then completed using his brothers as stand-ins along with state-of-the-art CGI. It was a pretty much seamless integration, and for most fans worked as a fitting send-off for the character, who in the films left behind his adventurous lifestyle in order to focus on his family. The question of whether he'll appear in Fast X Part 2 seems like it has a pretty obvious answer. Absolutely. His appearance is teased in F9 when his car pulls up at the end of the film, and if Fast X Part 2 is the final installment, then it only makes sense to have him at least briefly show up at whatever the team's final gathering may look like. However, there is a danger here. What if they don't get the CGI right this time? What if it looks too computer generated? Ella Ian Holm in the theatrical cut of Alien Romulus? That would be a massive fail and likely send the whole franchise out on a sour note. Of course, Fast X Part 2 could do something far worse than continuing on with a small plot thread or bringing in some questionable CGI. It could continue to do the many things that made Fast X such a chore for some fans. As one user on Reddit explains, Fast X is too long, has more characters than it knows what to do with, and much of it feels repeated from earlier films. That last bit is especially true, as it once again brought in a relative of a previous villain who wants revenge on the Fast family, called on a previous villain to work with the team, and had multiple characters return from the dead. It was like a greatest hits album performed by a lackluster cover band. If Part 2 really wants to end the franchise on a positive note, it would be wise to go a different direction from the previous installment. To repeat a repetition of that magnitude would be an unfortunate death knell for the series.
And then it happened again and again and again and again.
Another element that would substantially detract from audience enjoyment is repeating the emphasis on CGI spectacle that the past two movies reveled in. While we would never want to detract from the incredible real-life stunts performed in each film, it's worth noting that the amount of computer enhancement added to these scenes in recent years has been frustrating for longtime fans. For example, F9 features a plethora of CGI nonsense, but perhaps its most eyebrow-raising came early on at the culmination of the opening action sequence. There, Dom and Letty are trying to escape the bad guys in Dom's 2020 Dodge Charger Hellcat and use a broken bridge to escape across a ravine. It's one of those situations that implies Dom not only is a master of physics, but also seems to be able to bend its laws to his will.
How is that possible when none of it exists here?
There's an expectation going into a Fast and Furious film that there will be a substantial amount of real-life car action, but over the course of F9 and Fast X, it seems like a lot of that action has been substituted by outrageous CGI shenanigans. You know, like driving down an exploding dam, for example. If the 11th entry decides to be extra bonkers, it could wind up going back to space. Perhaps Dante, in all his omniscience, has concocted some sort of Moonraker-style space base.
Okay, what's happening?
Wow, this is so weird.
You know, why not? It's no holds barred ridiculous, but such is the series at this point. Whatever the context, going back to space would be a huge mistake, as it would not only double down on F9's second greatest blunder, but would also take us away from all that sweet street racing action that we so desperately crave. All this being said, it seems like the ultimate mistake for a final Fast and Furious film is to integrate the world of Hobbs and Shaw, something else teased to some degree by the latest installment. Specifically, it would be a shame to take on the same sci-fi aesthetic and plotting as Hobbs and Shaw, which notably featured Idris Elba as a cybernetically enhanced superhuman. It was a bridge too far for the series, but one that many fans can ignore due to it happening in a spin-off. For something like that to happen in the mainline continuity would be a tough pill to swallow, even in a world of spacefaring Pontiac Fieros.
This doesn't feel right.
But there is one last mistake that the franchise could make with its 11th entry, and that's allowing Vin Diesel's ego to hamper the production. We've heard plenty of stories of Diesel having to get his way behind the scenes. For example, there's the contractual demand that he never lose a fight, as demonstrated by his battle with Dwayne Johnson in Fast 5. His control over the franchise also shows in his portrayal of Dom, who becomes more and more of a savior figure as the films go on. It was even suggested, though never confirmed, that this same ego was what led to Justin Lin abandoning Fast X just days into production. Now, this isn't to say we don't love Vin Diesel and his portrayal of Dominic Toretto. He's a pop culture icon and will be saying family in that gruff voice for decades past the end of this franchise.
I don't have friends. I got family.
However, he is flawed, like any human, and his biggest flaw seems to be that he tends to let his ego get in the way. This could result in a very preachy ending for the character, when all we as fans want is a nice family barbecue to close things out. But what do you think? What's the worst that could happen? Let us know in the comments, and thank you for watching Screen Rant.